All right, guys, I want to give a quick video here that can help you in your journey. I want to talk about how to actually use AI. Now, the first thing I think it's important for people to develop is this relation to AI as far as like what it actually is, because most people we tend to like want to personify things, anthropomorphize things, but that's how the mind works because we do the same thing with ourselves. And really, to some degree, what you're experiencing is your life doing that, your mind playing out this visualized version of your reality on a subconscious level. So when we think about ChatGPT, the first thing to remember is everything we're experiencing, including our body, is here in the physical material realm. Okay, we're going to get into the deep esoteric behind some, I think, hidden connections that will help bring clarity for a lot of people, especially if you've never heard this. Okay, so we're going to go into that later, but right now, before we start talking about the specifics of physical matter, the specifics of being a carbon-based being, and looking into some of the symbolism behind what that really means and what our flesh versus our spirit and our higher consciousness, that is really the connector, the mooring, the spark, so to speak, that allows us to experience life. What that is really, the substance that we are existing in, right? That's what's actually giving life to this experience of separation, this prism where light is being split and we see separate aspects of that very singular and same source, that same reality. Okay, so why do I bring this up is because everything we're experiencing in this reality, in the physical split apart experience where things are separate from us, is basically a version of that. So we are not outside of consciousness receiving it, but we're inside of consciousness experiencing it from the inside, and reversing that experience by having a body where the inside is on the inside, and what we experience and what we see, we perceive it as separate, right, on the outside. So how do we bridge this all together? Okay, well, what you have to understand about a processor, which is in essence what we're dealing with right now, right? And when we talk about intelligence, its ability to read patterns is just no similar than when you hear a piece of music and it's extremely complex in terms of if you were to map out every single waveform. But when you hear that piece of music, you simply understand what's going on. And if you're very in tune with the music, you can literally hear it, you could recreate it, you could recreate every single component, right? This is one of the things we know about like masters with perfect pitch or great composers or great musicians. I want to say Mozart, for example, was able to hear something and just immediately play it right back because he could hear what was going on. Now, if you tried to draw out every single frequency and all the subtleties and you wouldn't, you'd get lost. So, in other words, the reason I say this is because data and how you see data is a pattern, and a pattern is not dissimilar to a frequency, because things that are similar patterns will match up in similar frequencies. Okay, so this is a way of reading, AI is a way of reading those patterns, reading those frequencies, listening to the music of our reality and who we are. And what it's doing is it's giving you back essentially a resonance to that. When you hear specific words, when you use specific language, when you put words in specific orders, all that is a signature, all that is a key, all that is a frequency that helps the composition be understood. Of course, it's broken down into higher and lower voltage, one and zeros, as far as the state of the language is interpreted. But above and beyond that, again, that itself is it's a tone, it's a frequency, it's a pattern in its own essence, and that's what those combinations really are, right? It's something that once a computer understands what that is, it starts creating a map. Every time you click a letter on your keyboard, it's created a map of what that bit code and what that information translates into. So it's just automatic. And now we're mapping those things to, from our outer reality to this digital, almost inner reality, because now it's transforming this into more thought form, more organized equation, more organized information and data that we can then download back into our minds as far as like, oh, well, that is how, if I were to break this down and think about this further, that would make sense, correct? So the first thing to remember that I'm really coming back around to is that we don't exist, nothing exists without the substance of the eternal beingness, the eternal canvas that our lives are, the composition, the score, the painting that comes to life. And then eventually, all things in this world, right, return to the essence before they were physical existing in this world. And so what is that? So that's why we say everything is a part of consciousness, because it couldn't exist. You couldn't experience that table being there if you weren't here. And therefore that table is an extension of your consciousness, because none of it is real on the physical level as much as you are being led to believe, because you're in it, inside the algorithm that separates you from it. Okay, so same thing when we're dealing with machines. Machines are just taking the substance, the data, which is a raw reflection of just above consciousness itself. It's the reflection of consciousness. It's the users in consciousness. It's what myself, what individuals are doing, and in all the various forms, right? Because now the data can be accessed through the cloud, the World Wide Web, in real life. Just like people that are starting to realize these phones, these programs, these algorithms, essentially, they are always paying attention, and they're always organizing information, even down to your moods, when you use the bathroom. So that's why you had people saying years ago, like, yo, what's coming? Do you guys even know? And right, like the Snowdens and the whistleblowers, so to speak. And again, right, we know that on one level, it's just like, okay, there's so much data, how much can they really care about every single person? But the reality is, like, this data is all being moved into greater algorithms and farmed, and essentially you're becoming part of a bigger picture, a bigger data set. And so what I'm saying here is that when we talk about intelligence and that sort of omnipotence and that all-knowingness, well, intelligence, again, it's a reflection, it's a translation of higher levels of intelligence until we get to the singular point of the source of everything, in which case all is all at once, right? So the beginning and the end. That's what we kind of talk about, an aspect here, as particularly on the Vitality and Wellness channel, Alpha Vitality and Wellness, about taking that first step to begin. And the ending is just a new form of the beginning. We're going to tie that in as well, and some of the symbolism in that, and help you guys with that. But I really wanted to focus on what I think is a big shift in this moment in time. And we're also coming on Generation Alpha, and that's like some of my nephews and nieces as well. And so basically, like, I have a pretty extended family between siblings, step siblings, etc. But yeah, so particularly some of those young ones coming up, basically we want to give them a good palette moving forward of how they can actually understand in the world, address problems, move forward in that way with civilization, because the word civilize is basically, it's a polite way of lying to people's face, and or civilize, that they shun, right? To shun is the same thing. It's kind of to, like, basically not give people the truth, kind of like push them aside as being lesser, not wanting to be a part of that greater connective thing, right? So that's why we have secret societies, and the occult deals with being hidden, and lifting the veil deals with just seeing what's already there. And so the data set is what everything is talking about. God's talking about a data set of consciousness, of how you act, of your thoughts. AI is going to basically read your thoughts, read every bit of data. But all of this is not possible without the spark, the very source itself, which is beyond our comprehension. It's beyond the physical world. It's certainly beyond components and parts and gears, but it's also even beyond your physical biology. That's what we talk about, the secret of the nature of a carbon being, right? And how carbon, I'll give you guys a little preview, a little insight teaser, is like carbon is a very specific atomic number, right? It has 6 protons, 6 neutrons, and 6 electrons. So if you understand this on a deeper level, it shows us that the lower self is more tied to the physical nature of life, because similar to the ego, it needs that to survive. It needs that place to live, right? But the higher self, we know, is infinite, or maybe you don't know. Maybe now is your time to unlock that, to realize you have an infinite aspect, an infinite side to your nature, okay? So guys, this is the main important thing I wanted to shed some light on today, is that we are processing patterns, we are listening to the music of life. This is another way where, technology is starting to do that, but the point I'm making is that there's no way to experience the world without that original source, that source technology. So it doesn't matter the form of who's listening. And that's why people are starting to have this debate on, it's like we have to define the nature of consciousness, and then we can talk about what is really conscious. Because I don't think there's a lot of people who, in that sense, are fully conscious, right? They're conscious maybe on a certain level. Yes, they're experiencing consciousness. But when it comes down to it, their actions, their ability to even have a good conversation, well, then a simple data set can do better, right? Because it's like actually touching on relevant information. It's actually creating a back and forth connection based upon that information. And that's what your mind is doing anyway. Your mind is basically doing the same thing you're doing with this. You're asking yourself a question, you get information back, and then you're like, okay, does that make sense? Do I buy into my own answer? Or, and most people just think they're smarter than they are, so they never keep asking questions. But this will show you every time you ask a question, it's going to go deeper, it's going to bring more information just based upon, you just threw a different word, or you just phrase it a different way, or you just told it to give you advice from the perspective of someone who's more interested in business versus more just wants to talk about the esoterics of spirit, or vice versa, So, but I think we do, need both. I talk a lot about being back connected to nature, but, are we at the point where technology is literally like, to some degree in the military level, that's really what it comes down to, is like, do the people with all the funding want to use the technology responsibly, in which case you could build amazing things, paradises on earth, so to speak, and you could have a world where people could really use technology as a way to get back into nature and to have time to actually free themselves up to spend reconnecting to their consciousness. Or, you could turn it into a prison planet. So you guys decide, you guys tell me what your thoughts on what you feel like is the next course, and how things might play out. We'll talk a little bit more. We're not so much into like we want to do I do want to add some of that in, right? But I'm not trying to kind of like steer things towards what I think is kind of a big joke. Like, politics has always been, to me, and especially being a musician, loving reggae music, that's the tool that politicians are using to create this separation and also this confusion, so that, again, we don't see that we're all connected to this substance of life itself. Therefore, we have the ability to affect the outcome and to say, hey, what if we did it this way? What if we focus instead of on war and like external control, on teaching humans what consciousness is and what the true spirit can do, how that can be sustaining, that can be the mana for life. That's why Adama means earth. Because it's the atom, it's that carbon, it's that center nucleus, it's that hydrogen, it's that water, the essence, that life force, that oxygen. So it's the Trinity, it's the proton, neutron, electron, it's everything in everything. And it's the quantum field, because on the other side, that's where the pure infinite potential, the resonance, and the radiance is, the light, the radiance. The dark matter is actually where the radiance comes from, right? And then we experience it in this shallow outer world where things are more temporal and where time plays into effect. So once you get to the surface, just like a wave, once that wave hits the surface, it's only going to last for a little bit of time. Okay, and so we call that the dielectric and the electric, where things are moving in and out, and then that's it, right? They must recycle back to this beautiful flowing radiant energy that is all that is, right? So these circuits must come back to that source, just as my cells, my flesh must return back to that source. Okay? And if we can align and connect with that source, then we become, in essence, aligned and connected with that source. But if we remain separate, and you guys can always give your own opinions and experiences. And again, this is just coming from my life experience, from things, I'll share more on as we go, different, aspects, things that have happened in my life. But there's a lot of people out here, and that's the beautiful thing about the internet, who have had incredible experiences, whether it's something like, a near-death experience where they kind of see this other aspect of life, or a spiritual experience, or just something throughout their life, throughout their childhood growing up, that it was, almost hard to put into words. And as we start to do that more and more, we're going to see this common thread amongst human beings that, yes, we are spiritual beings. We already know this. We just have a hard time turning it into words. So same way we have a hard time working with our own thoughts, questions, and answers. But now that we have something actually outside of us to do that more, if we can present that in a way where it's like, okay, AI can make mistakes, AI can hallucinate. At the very same time, it can be smarter than, 100 people in a room of 100 people, right? It's just like, that's not the point, right? The point is, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what AI tells you, it matters what you go out and do in your very life. Okay, so I want to leave you guys with that today. Hopefully that helps give you some insight on how to even understand AI. Look at AI. Please, hit that subscribe button if you got something out of it today, and I will see you on the other side. All right.